We're starting.
Yay.
Okay, before we start, I'd like you all to stand up for a moment, please. Just stand up. Well, this lecture is going to include the body, and I think we all need to get back into ours. So just have a good shake. We've been sitting and thinking, and just shake and get some energy back into your body. Come on. Maybe just tighten everything, and then just... Okay. Sure.
Does anybody have any objection to a little bit of incense in the room?
No. No.
That'd be great.
You don't want any?
No, I don't.
See, that's why I asked.
My name is Kitty Kennard. This lecture is on keeping body and soul together. And I have to tell you right now, mine is not. It's lost somewhere over the Atlantic, and I'm not having a very good time with jet like this time around, so I'm just really hoping I keep my brain and mouth together. And, you know, I've done this lecture before in various workshops with it, and for some reason this time I have brought my entire library with me just in case I forget something. So apologies that it's not quite as, maybe not as flowing as I would like, but I'm going to need a few prompts this time. Just a little bit about myself. My conventional training was a nutritionist. I have a Bachelor of Science Honors in Nutrition. I used to lecture at a university in Oxford. But I've always been a bit left of center, and I've always had an interest in all things complementary and alternative. As I said yesterday, I did EA Astrology here 10 years ago. I've also studied quite extensively medical astrology with some of the top teachers here and in the UK. My studies have also taken me into radionics, flower essences, herbs, homeopathy. I'm a massage therapist, Reiki, Ayurveda. About 4 years ago, I did Roger Wolger's course on integral regression therapy. Is anybody familiar with him? Okay, have you done his course?
I've been doing, but other forms.
Okay, okay. And it was through that I actually realized it dovetailed very nicely with evolutionary astrology, because what you're doing is dealing with past life themes. It's a trauma-based therapy. Getting into, well, it also tied in with a lot of what I did, subtle body, the energy body work. I did that. I've also done some postgrad work in transpersonal psychotherapy. I've lectured on the continent in Arizona. I've done some workshops, and I was honored to be at the last EA conference. How many other people were here the last time? Not that I have that many jokes, but I won't do the same ones over again. And I'll try to do some different case studies. Okay, in January 1997, I brought Jeffrey over to the UK for the first time. As you know, well, maybe you don't know, but we're rather shy and suspicious in England, and it took that long for him to actually get out to England. We did some pilot workshops, and from there came the Pluto schools that Jeffrey taught, and now it's being taught by Mark Jones and myself. I also work part-time for the airlines because travel's my drug. I'd like to thank Kim Marie and Rose Marcus, two of the most phenomenal women I know. They never fail to amaze me with their energy and what they're able to do. I'm going to break up this lecture into two parts. That way I don't have to worry about my boundaries as to whether I stray too long or too short on one, what I put in the other. I'm going to just briefly go through a little bit of evolutionary astrology in general, as far as looking at themes, patterns, a bit on medical astrology, how the two tie in together in the past lives. I'll talk about the subtle bodies, trauma, and I'll link up with Jeffrey's outer planets and the various subtle bodies, the correlations. If I get time in this one, I'll also go on to Jeffrey's chakra system of medical astrology, and certainly the emphasis on the next one will be on a lot of case studies. Okay, I'm going to start off with some quotes here. You know, I feel like I need a telephone book to stand on here just to... Okay. Okay, D.H. Lawrence, More Pansies. I am not a mechanism, an assembly of various sections, and it's not because the mechanism is working wrongly that I am ill. I am ill because of wounds to the soul. to the deep emotional self, and the wounds to the soul take a long, long time, and only time can help, and patience, and a certain difficult repentance. Long, difficult repentance, realizations of life's mistakes, and the freeing of oneself from the endless repetition of the mistake, which mankind at large has chosen to sanctify. And this is from Kabir, a Sufi poet and mystic. Thinker, listen. Tell me, what do you know of that is not inside your soul? You take a pitcher of water and set it down in water. Now it has water on the inside and water on the outside. We mustn't give it a name, lest silly people start talking again about the body and the soul. Lord Byron, one certainly has a soul, but how it came to allow itself to be enclosed in a body is more than I can imagine. And finally, Ludwig Wittgenstein, the human body is the best picture of the human soul. Okay. So I've just got a couple pictures here. When we talk about past life and past life therapy, and whether we're looking at it through the themes in the charts or like from the work that I also do, I think most of us like to imagine that we were, you know, quite elevated personalities. But in reality, most of our soul lives are kind of more like this. Are all of you students of EA? Do you understand the basics of the Pluto polarity point, South Node, all that? Okay, well, just very quickly, because there's not time or scope to do it now, but if you're looking at the birth chart, it is a blueprint. It's a blueprint of our soul. It's a blueprint of our character, our psychology, and medical astrology. It's a blueprint of our physiology and anatomy as well. And because I'm not separating any of these, it's the whole blueprint of the totality of our soul. But our soul, where we come in and what is our actual genetic inheritance, often we think about our bodies and whatever physiological manifestations we have as being part of our human genetics, but we also have a soul genetics. And probably the basic tree trunk of this would be Pluto, house, sign, and aspect. Okay? From there you've got the South Node, house, sign, and aspect. The ruler of the South Node, house, sign, and aspect. And then of course you build up the tree with all the branches, and where we're trying to evolve onto would be the polarity point, North Node, and so on. But because I'm talking about where we come into now and sort of our genetic and our soul imprint, blueprint, this will start to tell you your sum total, your soul history, and what you've presented now in this life. So our natal Pluto, if you remember, is our deep-seated security needs, and they drive us to approach life in the same way over and over and over. We can stay stuck in our old ways. Problems seem to stay there. And it's when we're trying to grow and evolve that we push on to the polarity point. Okay, but the nature of past life stories, certainly the way I work, I know Jeffrey can go into great detail about our past lives, but for most of us, we're looking at the nature of it, the theme of it, the energy of it, not necessarily the exact details. The truth is higher than the fact, okay? But with the South Node, Pluto ruler, this is where we recreate and reenact our dramas time and time again, lifetime after lifetime. It's basically our soul's habit. It's what we're very familiar with, and when push comes to shove, that's what we tend to fall back into because it's known to us. It shows our psychological attitudes, our drives, our behavioral expressions, life circumstances. It shows that to which we're attached. Okay, and these are powerful, unquestioned assumptions because we know them, and they somehow or another enslave us to keep repeating the past, and it drives us to attract even what we fear because it's familiar, and we bring it into manifestation. The birth chart also shows signatures of wounds. Pluto, Scorpio, it's the truth. And quite often when we're faced with the truth, it does elicit in us anger, denial, resistance. So when we make a mistake, we tend to repeat it. And one of the things that locks a pattern in is through trauma. So later on, I'm going to be talking about trauma, and I think that's going to be elaborated on quite a bit more fully this afternoon from Mark. Often you'll find triggers or reenactments, things that come out in childhood, like we say childhood problems. People say, why look into past lives? Well, I think being evolutionary astrologers, we don't need to question that so much anyways. But a lot of times the childhood will reflect it. Triggers that happen in our present life will bring back some of these past life patterns. The truth is also in our body. Our body doesn't lie. Okay, so Pluto is the motivation. It's the truth to, if there is a trauma, say to dissociate. Uranus is how we dissociate. And Neptune is probably where we go to. Okay, so how are we going to start putting some of this together? In astrology, we're working with symbols, and symbols are often like the higher messages, okay? We've got, in addition to that, does anybody here do Hori astrology? Okay, all right. All right, what we've got here is like, do you know the game Cluedo? What do you call it here? Where you've got Mrs. Plummer and the kitchen knife in the library? Yeah, okay. That's basically what we're trying to do with this. We've got the symbols that are inherently multidimensional, and our higher self speaks through these symbols. So we've got the players, the actors, the storyline, the tools, the setting. These are all the things in the charts through the planets, the signs, the houses, the aspects. And as I said, the birth chart is the reflection of our past, our soul history. It's the psychic template that will emerge in this lifetime. It's our soul's agenda. So we're all born with certain psychic residues that from previous lives, whether you call it our karma or our psychic inheritance. Pluto South Node, it's what's there at birth, as I said. And then these psychic impressions carry with them the emotional weight of memories and associations. So it's the fragments of our personalities, our attitudes, obsessions, phobias, and our physical attributes. Okay, it also shows us timing, readiness. If a person's not actually, you can see by transit, progression, solar return, when a person's ready. So it's not only the players, the actors, the storyline, it's the timing of when these things are ready to be, brought out, reenacted, faced at. It shows the triggers, it shows the themes, and again, if you look at the planetary phases, the ages and cultures is represented through the signs and the planets. You can pinpoint, again, the themes of various lifetimes and what was going on culturally, socially at that time. The houses, the circumstances, the arenas where this is being played out. When I was first studying the evolutionary astrology, when I was first studying the integral regression therapy, well, let me just say quickly what it is. I don't have time to actually, go into it like I have in other lectures, but basically it's a psychodramatic replay of past life traumas. It's not hypnosis. A lot of past life therapy is hypnosis, not this one, because the premise of this one is because we're a body and the various layers, all of them have to be involved for it to be released. And so it's not for the lighthearted, it's not light and fluffy, and no, you are not detached, because that's one of the things we definitely do not want, because anytime there is trauma, that's one of the first things we do is detach, because it's a very good safety mechanism for us to cope with something that would be too painful and extreme to cope with. So we use, through the introduction, you find out what is presenting, and it could be emotional, mental, life circumstance, physical. And we go through an induction process where they reenact what's happening. They stay in first person. They don't narrate it as if they're watching it. It's happening to them at the time. And I, as the therapist, am a little bit like the I'd say the director of a film. And you know with films now how you can fast forward and you can rewind, you can skip, and that's what you do. You don't go through the whole na-na-na-na-na and then this happened. You just kind of fast forward and go backwards to important points, to trigger points, usually where a trauma occurred, shutdown occurred, and you have them go through that. We ask a lot of where questions, how questions. Don't ask why, that's too left brain. Then they start getting into a monologue and the philosophy of what's happening. We want them just to go through it. It's by bringing it to the surface, reenacting it, that hopefully it can be released. It's bringing it to the consciousness and then letting it go. A lot of the traumas that we do have can happen pre-verbal, whether it's like in this life. So just talking it through isn't necessarily going to reach where it is, and especially if it's a case where your body's disassociated in a trauma, you just speak directly to the body. Stomach, what are you feeling? Arm, what are you doing? Legs, why are you moving like that? And then the body can tell you, because somatically you know what's happened, even though your consciousness has gone somewhere else. Okay, like, you know, why a lot of us go into astrology. I mean, I was trying to figure out a few things in, you know, my own life. And, you know, I've been here and Jeff's talked to me about cataclysms and repeating themes in my own chart. And they keep repeating, and they keep repeating, and they keep repeating. So I think that was, you know, kind of based on what was happening in my life, was one of the motivations to do the past life work, and also, you know, my work as a therapist. So I'm just going to throw up my chart very quickly. Being double Scorpio, I used to hide it, but I'm trying to be more Aries and not keep secrets anymore. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go through this because I don't want to dwell on it too much, but just to show you where it started clicking for me. Oh, by the way, you know, because I've been waking up at 2 in the morning, you know, is Kristen here? Oh. I was putting Black Moon into all my charts last night. That's what I was doing from 2 o'clock this morning. Tonight I'll be putting in Lucifer. Okay, all the, you know, the astrology themes of abandonment and, you know, self-reliance and inner security. Ruler of my 2nd house, Jupiter, ruler of my north node, you know, ultimate, you know, self-reliance. Pluto trying to get to the 4th, you know, finding the basic core security within myself. South node in the 7th, everybody knows more than me, and they're probably better than me, and I need to depend on them somehow. I mean, these things that were going on certainly reflected in my relationships of any sort, intimate or even friendship ones. So when I started getting into some past life ones, I thought, you know, it actually shows up in the chart as well. So let me just run through a couple of these very quickly. And apologies to some of you that might have heard a couple of these last year, even though I didn't let you know it was me. I've always been told I can't, lifetime after lifetime, where I'm into herbs and healing and a wise woman, but I'm always told you can't make a living. Well, look what I've done in this life. I had, you know, a list this long of all these things that I've studied, but I don't necessarily use them. Well, you can't make a living out of it. And again, becoming your own authority, it's that 10th house, but squaring the 7th house ruler and 7th south node. I always gave away my power to whoever partner I was. They were the medicine man. They were the one who I kind of lived off of theirs rather than, I was always their wife or their partner. Rather than, you know, putting to use my own. South node ruler, 5th, this, you know, I should be finding my own identity. An explorer in Africa. I've always been drawn to Africa in this life. Ruler of the 4th house, Uranus. It's in a foreign country. In fact, I have a place in Africa. I finally bought a place there. If you look at the cultural times of Cancer, African cultures. Anyways, I'm an explorer, South Node ruler in the 5th. I come across well, myself and my colleagues were ambushed by cannibals of some sort, and certainly, you know, natives that were vicious. Everybody else split. Nobody helped me. I was left on my own. And I'm going to get back to this later. Thoughts that you have, like, I would never abandon my friends. I would never leave anybody. How come I'm always left alone? Pluto square Venus, being left alone, the whole abandonment thing. One where I was, and a lot of past lives in England where I found myself living, but I'm some street urchin in the, I don't know the time exactly. But my family, I was the youngest of the family. I had a funny feeling that they didn't like me or didn't want me or didn't have time for me. And so I was the one who was always trying to please. And again, you know, learning the whole fourth house bit. And I just had a creepy feeling it wasn't going to work. And the rest of the kids had a nice, free, easy life. I was always trying to help out at home, to do what I could to make myself completely invaluable, that they would need me. Scorpio, Taurus. It didn't work. They said I was going to go visit my aunt and uncle. They left me there. And as soon as my parents went, they chucked me out on the street. So I was completely abandoned, and just scenes of crying and crying in a fetal position. And I know that when I was kicked out of my home in this life, I was doing the same thing. But the thoughts that are going through your mind, I've got to survive, I've got to hold myself together, I'm all on my own, I need to be strong. This life, all I've ever heard from my family is Kitty's the strong one, she can take it, she can do it, she can hold herself together. That one where I was in Africa, by the way, I did get sort of dismembered before they probably threw me in the pot, and I remember at the time thinking, I've got to hold myself together. And even now at nighttime, I will be like this, and I think, Kitty, you can relax, you're in bed. You know, because like if someone's trying to dismember you, you're holding on, like this. And, I mean, so, I'm not quite sure where I found that one in this one. But anyways, ones where there's just a lot of loss, losing a baby, a lot of deaths where I was hung, choked, a lot of neck injury ones. In this life, I have a thyroid problem, and I've actually got, well, I won't go into details now, but and do you guys know a little bit about a medical astrology? Because if not, either at the end of this one or the next one, I'll run into a few of the correlations. In basic medical astrology, and certainly in Jeff's, he'll tell you that it's Jupiter, Venus, Pluto. And so it shows injuries to the neck, Taurus neck. Okay, so as we're going to see, which is it? Is it the physical that gives the emotional? I can't find my voice, I can't speak up. It's also both. Anyways, it's another one where it's a shaman. And I had a vision, and no one believed me that the village was going to be completely ravaged. I saw it, and I couldn't get anybody to listen to me. And the frustration, I began to doubt my own intuition, to doubt my own wisdom. Ruler of the North Node is balsamic to Pluto, trusting my own intuition versus everybody else knowing more than me, Gemini. And I let them talk me out of it. Unfortunately, the village was ambushed. Everybody was massacred. And I ripped my eyes out and went out in the desert or wherever and let myself die. In fact, the next day, somebody said, when I did that regression, they said, did you have any dreams last night? And I said, well, nothing that pertains to past lives. And I had a dream that I was on board the aircraft. I work as cabin crew. And there was a fire on board, and I couldn't get anybody off. I'm like, you're going to die, get off, get off. I'm actually pulling them out of their seats, trying to push them out. Nobody would listen to that. They don't understand the danger they're in. He goes, look, that's exactly your past life. I mean, fortunately, I've not had to deal with that in an airplane, but it was that thing, no one's listening to me. So whether, and we'll go into this when we work through the subtle bodies, whether it's an idea or an emotion, no one's listening to me, you end up with throat problems. My tonsils were removed when I was 5 because they were bleeding and choking me. I died from choking, hanging. I've seen this in so many cases, other than my own. The first person I did a regression on, and this is actually where I also started thinking, this is where it's good to have a bit of both a chart, and I thought if I knew this ahead of time, this particular person, I was trying to regress him. I mean, he was out of his body. He was gone. And he wouldn't come back for anything. And the best I could get out of him was terrible problems he had with his father. I mean, an absent father. He could never be good enough for his father. He idealized his father, but he was just off. And afterwards I said, can I have your chart? Well, in medical astrology, the ascendant is very much about your physical body. Neptune's sun, there he is, the absent father, the idealized father. The sun is your own ego, my own ego boundaries. Neptune completely dissolved. He didn't want to stay in his body anyways. And I thought if I had known that ahead of time, it would have helped me how I would have conducted that particular regression. Ooh. And that's not, is that my eyesight? Tell you, that is my eyesight right now. Sorry about that. I don't know if there's a focus or if...
Yeah, there is.
There is.
No, right here.
Okay, that's a little bit better. Yeah, okay. I really don't have time to go into too much of, like I said, the correspondences. You know, basically medical astrology in its early days was there's a correlated sign and planet to all the anatomical body parts and systems. These all had herbal rulerships. I use medical astrology when, you know, choosing times for surgery. The right type of remedy that a person would have, when to take it. For instance, I mean, probably a well-known one is, okay, for instance, if you think of Mars, what is Mars? It's hot and it's fiery. So what would it rule in the body if it was manifesting? Headache, fevers, inflammations. What do we usually do when we have a headache or an inflammation? Take aspirin. The willow tree is moon-ruled, and the moon is wet and cold and damp, and Mars is hot and fiery. So to dampen down that fiery Mars, you use something cool and wet like the moon. So you'd look to a moon-ruled herb, and where does aspirin come from? Willow. Okay, so that's sort of how, you know, medical astrology was in the first times, and still is to quite a bit. Obviously now we go more into the, you know, the mind and the spirit and the emotions behind it. Yeah, I'll see how I go on the time and maybe, you know, give you a few correlations on that. And I certainly will when I do the chakras from Jeff. So anyways, when I was saying you're kind of putting a picture together, you're going into the astrological forensics of, you know, what's going on. So that does play a big part. You know, right now I'm going to be focusing in this lecture mainly on the subtle bodies, but it is good to have a basic knowledge of what planets and signs rule various body areas as well. Okay. Now, a study of several hundred terminally ill patients, well, untreatable terminally ill patients, under hypnosis were directed to locate the cause of the condition. The majority of them located a past life event which contributed, and just by this alone, 70% of them had a remission. So every part of the body has a story to tell. I think Fritz Perls said that. Again, you know, why are my shoulders up all the time? Well, I'm trying not to be dismembered, but if somebody was hung, you know, you're holding like that because you don't want to, you know, break like that, or somebody who's, you know, carrying a yoke. So your shoulders are like this, but as I go into the subtle bodies, it's not only your shoulders like this, but what's the thought that goes like that? Life's a burden. I've got to carry it. You know, I've got all the responsibility and the weight on my shoulders. Say, for instance, impotence in this lifetime could come from a past life of shame, castration, women's problems, quite often rape and abuse. I mean, I can go on and on. I've got all sorts of examples I might get to later, and maybe you can share some with me. So what I'm saying is, in addition to psychic inheritance, there are physical predispositions to illnesses, weaknesses, even accidents. You know, somebody's accident prone, you think, well, that's not inherited. But if there's a blip somewhere in their karma, you know, that makes a weak spot, or, you know, kind of a void or a hot spot even in their energy field that attracts that. And also accidents if this person was in their last life or in many lives at war. So it may include some sort of violence, or, you know, some accidental catastrophe that happened, you know, car accidents, earthquakes. again, you know, we're not treating the mind and the brain as different. Studies in psychoneuroimmunology now show, you know, where is our mind? Is our mind in our brain? It's actually everywhere. It's our consciousness. So if we're feeling sad, we're not just not in our brain feeling sad. We're going to have sad cells in our kidneys, sad cells in our, you know, stomach, that whole thing. Okay, emotional issues become embedded in the particular part of the body that was wounded in a past life. And I hope I can explain this well because it's kind of a two-way thing. So, say I was stabbed in the heart, okay? I come into this lifetime with, say, a wound to my heart. I'm a broken heart. For some reason, it's the sadness or the grief. So, it may also show up as a physical weakness in this lifetime because of a scar from the past life as well. So sometimes the transmission is predominantly of a physical memory trace and the emotional and the thought content being secondary, like maybe it was betrayal or grief. You know, you're being stabbed and you left, you know, you're leaving your children behind. That's sort of an accidental category of physical karma, but of course emotions such as grief and terror, extreme grief and the metaphorical heartache, it could predispose you to a physical problem in your heart the next time around. Are you following that? Okay. Are any questions up so far? So I'm trying to...
You mentioned that there was a relationship between Venus, Jupiter, and Pluto, and you then said with respect to your own circumstances it involved Taurus, which had to do with part of the neck thing.
Neck, throat.
Can you explain more what you meant by the relationship between Venus, Jupiter, and Pluto? Is that breathing issues in general? Or?
Sorry, with thyroid.
Thyroid. Okay.
Yeah, it was thyroid neck. Venus having co-rulership with the thyroid, Taurus the neck, Jupiter, according to Jeff. Pluto is, well, something going wrong. And it can also rule cancer. And, you know, strict medical astrology can rule cancer and overgrowth. I don't have cancer, but I've got a growth on my thyroid. Okay.
And what does Jupiter rule?
It co-rules the thyroid, according to Jeffrey. You don't find that one in a lot of other medical books, but it does with Jeffrey, and it works. It certainly works empirically on the charts that I've used.
Do you look specifically at negative or stressful aspects, or are positive flowing aspects also indicated?
Predominantly the stressful ones. Okay, but again, I'm going to contradict myself with Jupiter and Venus, for instance, which are the nice, lovely, indulgent ones. Somebody who's got a problem with diabetes, for instance, it's too much sweetness and sugar. If you have a trine between those two, it's just making it bigger and better. Mm-hmm. You know, so in some instances it can be just, you know, the contact itself. And also in medical astrology, you know, again, it's not the scope of this lecture, but the inconjunct, the quincunx, is a major trouble aspect. Okay, so it's not only just the cases where we've had, you know, a physical trauma, but if there's usually an emotionally associated component, and it's the highly complex feelings and the thoughts of, you know, of whether I was guilty, a failure, humiliated, disgusted. That's all part that needs to be surfaced and released. So sometimes the physical trauma is secondary. But every part of the body will have a metaphorical or a symbolic meaning. Like, for instance, if, you know, I've got a weak stomach, possible past life causes for this could be poisoning, starvation, dysentery, cancer. It could be something associated with an emotional content, because we often tend to put our emotions there. If these are associated strongly with guilt, they're a lot harder to dislodge, by the way. But for instance, somebody who lost her guts, I think I used this example in my last lecture. I was, again, in England, and I was hung, drawn, and quartered. But again, I was turned in by my colleagues. And there I was, just in front of all of them. And you know, you don't think of it, but you think of some of the metaphors you say. I'm always saying, oh, I've just spilled my guts out. I've just lost my guts. Oh, why don't I just, you know, spill my guts out for you? Well, that's what I did. And of course, now in this lifetime, I do have gut problems. I've got irritable bowel, and I can also show that through the Jeffrey's chakra system, because you don't actually see it in my natal chart, by the way, unless you are able to do a little bit more digging. So, you know, your guts, that's also your nerves, your solar, you know, like not your nerves as a nervous system, but your courage, and that's solar plexus. So it's like, oh, you lose your guts to do something, you don't have the nerve to do something, your solar plexus is what needs a bit of, you know, bolstering up. Okay, Wilhelm Reich said that an organic disease is a reflection of an emotional disturbance, and that as a consequence, if we can cure the emotional dysfunction on an energetic level, the body will ultimately heal itself. Okay, past life traumas always have a specific and not a general relationship to the current physical problem. And many past life scenarios may cluster around one theme or body part. Something that's not just physical, but anything in past lives. You talk about, well, what is karma? It's a habit. It's a repeating theme. And if you look at our lives as like all the grooves, say, on an LP, you know how it is, you get a scratch, and then it goes zip, 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 every time you get to that point, and it's that type of thing. That's the karma. It's a theme that gets repeated and gets repeated to where it's a habit, and it's trying to break that, which is releasing it, bringing it to consciousness. I mean, the whole point of past lives is not to get bogged down in them, and I know this is where a lot of people have resistance with why bother with past lives. We're living here or now, and of course we are. What you're trying to do, at least in the work that you know, we do, is you're going into a past life to release it. You don't want it anymore. And it's because you want to live in the now, and to live more fully in the now, you don't want all the baggage that you've had before. So the whole point of reliving a past life is so you can forget it. You know, I know as astrologers and probably having your own consultation, just as an aside, listen to people's metaphors, what they're saying. Oh, I'm always being stabbed in the back. I mean, why are we saying that? We know we mean betrayal. But, you know, they're probably giving you a clue as to something that happened in the past life that might help, you know, find the means to resolve a theme that's going on with them. Does anybody have things that they're always saying you want to share? I'm always spilling my guts out. Somebody's being stabbed in the back. Yeah?
I've read a lot of Scientology.
Uh-huh.
And they have several very old books where they talk about people who have stomach problems. They're generally living a past life experience, and they put themselves into a situation that they can't stomach.
Yeah, I can't stomach this. I had an aunt who ended up with hemorrhoids, but she kept saying her daughter was a pain in the ass. Oh, you're pissed off. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I have a strong kind of body-mind connection, and whenever people say things like I'm pissed off or a pain in the ass or pain in the neck, I go, watch what we say.
Yeah, I'm always taking it in the neck, and yeah, it's just, so, you know, listen, be aware of that when you've got your client with you. They're really giving you some big clues as to where some of their past life, you know, traumas are. Yeah?
Or how, and one of the things I say a lot, and after I say it, it's like, oh, watch it.
Yeah.
You're driving me crazy. I'm going to go crazy. This is driving me nuts.
Yeah. And you think about it, you know, like, you're not nuts. I haven't been spilling my guts out. My friend isn't stabbed in the back. You know, when you say to somebody, can't you show me your heart? You know, they're not going to grab their physical heart, or I wear my heart on my sleeve. You're talking about various components. But yeah, that is another one. And certainly cases where I've had clients that have been crazy. And the big fear that people are going to think I'm crazy. Yeah, the past life was sure enough. They were being dragged out in a straitjacket and put in an institution for the rest of their life. I'm trying to think of a few. I mean, I've got so many examples. What is my time?
20 minutes.
Okay. Maybe I'll save some for the next one. But also the physical things that will show up. My roommate, the computer programmer, I mean, real, corporate stuff, she, didn't believe in any of this. She went to Rome, and when she visited the Colosseum, she ended up with this huge blistering welts around her ankles. I mean, it just spontaneously occurred, and she's trying to figure out, what is going on. It prompted her to investigate that she did some past life work. Guess what? She's at the Colosseum in Rome, and she was shackled and had to be brought in. Another lady who was very shy to speak in public. Most of us have not been booed and hissed and had tomatoes thrown at us, thank goodness. But why are so many of us afraid to stand up and speak? There is probably past life humiliation that we're resonating to. And one lady that was, she was incredibly shy, but she says, so she was regressed, and she got into, as a child in this lifetime, she was about 4 years old, and she's wearing a white dress. She goes, they're all staring at me, and I'm in this white, I'm wearing a white dress, and they're all staring at me. So, you go a little bit further, and nothing actually happened. It was just a Christmas party, it was family and friends, nothing actually traumatic happened. When the regression went further to a past life, there she is as a Christian being dressed in white, and she's now facing the entire audience of the Colosseum. They're all staring at me, and I was wearing the right thing. So there again, it was triggered as a childhood thing, but there's usually a story behind the story. And even in the past life stories, when we talk about, again, all of this, a lot of times in regression work, you're there, and they're talking about something else. They're saying, like, I've got to be strong, I've got to be strong, or they won't believe me, or I'm crazy, or whatever. You have them repeat that, and that catapults them into another life. And sometimes you just keep working your way down, to the core, because that metaphor follows them throughout lives as well. Okay, so our past lives our present life actually contains the residues of previous trauma. Trauma, as I said, locks in the pattern. I think we're all aware, we've heard now of post-war syndrome and post-traumatic stress syndrome. Well, what are our past lives if they aren't post? And so you think of people who are in this life having gone through a post-traumatic event or a post-war event, and they're carrying that trauma with them. In various aspects of our personalities and in our lives, we are also carrying post-traumatic stress because of our past lives. As I said, karma is a habit. We reproduce the pattern, recreate the grooves according to this pattern. Sure. Yeah.
If you know the pattern and you don't know the past life to it, or you've got an idea of what it could be, but you don't actually remember the event, is there a way to get rid of it anyway?
I think it's the past life work that I do, it has to be present. You have to be fully aware of it and reenact it. Okay, I'm sure there's going to be other people are a little bit, I'd say, softer and nicer, and they let you just narrate it or watch it from somewhere else. I mean, and that's fine. There's been so much body work now, and I have them written down somewhere, but I can't find them. But again, because you're not taking it as the whole. It's like the whole of you experienced it. And I'm sure there is, and I'm not enough of an authority to give a definitive answer. I just know in my work what is most effective. And also I think through the astrology, as I said, it's the timing and the triggering. I've had cases where even the person themselves know that there's something else lurking there, but the time is not right. You've got to wait for heavy-duty Pluto transit or Uranus to shake it up. Because before then, what's the point? They're not actually going to, get it. Or it might even produce more trauma to face it before they're ready. And that's the other thing with past life work. People say, oh, I'm making it up. Well, in transpersonal psychotherapy, imagination is not an inferior function. It's quite a superior function. And, if you're making it up, well, where'd you get those ideas? And so what? You're just honoring the unconscious as if and treat it as real. If a person's not ready, they're not going to go there. And if you, start leading them, like putting leading questions in, if it's not what they know, even people who like to please will say, no, that's not what's happening. So I think Like I said, I'm not enough of an authority to give an answer on that, but I just know through astrology you can see the times of readiness, which, by the way, was another reason why I found this such a big tool in my other work. You could see the times of readiness and the themes of when they, felt it was their time to go there. So as I've got my notes here, you get to the roots, because our old tapes take up a lot of energy. We build up a lot of defenses to keep what we don't want to know down, and that takes up a lot of energy and takes energy from this lifetime. So, we've got parts of our own soul trapped in these past lives. What we're trying to do is to integrate it. I'm sure you've heard of soul retrieval, where like fragments are left behind or split off or given away. Okay, Jung saying his shadow work. We need to look at what's unpleasant and negative, and those characteristics that we're not particularly proud of. By not repressing them any further is how we integrate them. It's like he calls it complexes, and it's some theme which takes hold, and often it's got a psychological component. And it's our compulsions that continue to, that will drive us continuously to repeat circumstances over and over, same old scenarios, old defeats, betrayals, losses, humiliations, It's like the complexes are running us. You say, oh, I don't know what came over me. These are, past life things. In fact, I've got a note here, like, even attracting the aggression of animals. In fact, a chart that's quite involved, and I'll show you tomorrow. This particular person's afraid of cats. But you know how some people, it's like when you're afraid of an animal, they always come right to you? Right. Yeah? Yeah. So you think about teenagers and some of the reckless behavior, like the daredevil. I mean, it's like they don't fear death itself, the way they drive in the cars and some of the reckless, dangerous things that they do. How many young men especially died young in war, where they were completely, massacred, blown to bits or whatever. And it's like, you look at children playing, they reenact past lives. It's like they're still trying to come to terms with it. And teenagers, having lost their lives at that age through being living on the knife's edge because they're in a war situation, somehow they're trying to reconcile that or integrate it, and obviously there's a lot more going on. They're like hormones in teenagers as well, but that's also, South Node Pluto stuff. Not necessarily, well, they do that as well, but you look at some of the fantasies that children play, like where are they getting these characters when they're playing make-believe? Quite often, especially before the age of 7, the first Saturn square, they're still trying to reconcile or, come to amends with atonement, I suppose, of some of the past lives, because they're still that bit closer to the veil. My daughter has Mars in the 3rd house, just basic astrology. That's, short-term traveling. Mars, Aries, it's like, fast. She had, when she was 2, she was telling, it was actually quite spooky. She was saying, Mom, she goes, I'm in a car, and we're driving too fast. Well, that's kind of Mars in the 3rd in Aries. And she said, there's a big bang, and everything goes black. And I said, what happened next? And she said, there's a lot of light. Oh, and there's my fairy godmother. She's only 2. She's trying to describe this. Well, Mars, Uranus, Saturn, that looks quite like, that kind of a square is an accident-prone type thing. In fact, before the age of 2.5, she broke 4 bones on 3 different occasions because she's just accident-prone. It was almost like she was still reliving this car accident. And even if you're an astrologer and into this stuff and you hear your kids speaking, it kind of spooks you. So I said, Amy, where was Mommy and Daddy? And she said, oh, you 2 hadn't even been born yet. And she's very pissed off that she's back as my daughter this time because she's so much older than me. So I'm not kidding you. Okay, for instance, our lover leaves us and we don't think we're going to survive it. We're going to survive it. We're not going to die of it. But you can think of abandonment themes in past lives where if somebody leaves you, like your parents, you're a little kid and you come back to the village and it's all massacred, including mom and dad, or they've dropped you off in an orphanage or, you know, sold you into slavery or whatever. There's a huge abandonment theme there where it could cost you your life. So when we experience abandonment in this life, we're not going to die, chances are. But that's what it feels like. That's what it stirs up in us, because it triggers off an abandonment issue when we actually probably did die, or, you know, had to certainly figure out how to survive. Anyways, something else about, you know, like talk therapy, and it certainly has its place, but it's saying, you know, like the buried material sometimes is inaccessible through traditional talk therapy, because it's an intellectual discussion quite often, and again, like with children who have trauma in this lifetime, it's pre-verbal. And so it is held somatically or emotionally, or, you know, even, do you know what I'm saying? Anyways, let's see. Okay, because of time, let me move on real quick here to the subtle bodies. Do some of you work with like energy medicine, and are you aware of subtle bodies and this and that? Okay, as you're going to know, there's people kind of have their own versions. After you get into the transpersonal state, and there's different people have different names for what it is. And basically in this lecture, I'm just going to be focusing on mainly these and the transpersonal one. Sorry? Oh, that's all right.
Thank you.
It's okay. Oh, by the way, I mean, in Roger's work, the psychic inheritance, the kind of karmic psychic inheritance, it's called the samskara. And it's like the psychic scar tissue that leads us to the, well, Freud used to call it repetition compulsion. So people say, all right, well, you know, I've got a completely different body. So how can I actually have a physical manifestation or variation on a theme from a past life when I had a completely different physical body? Okay, so let's see if I can explain that. All right, on a vibrating level, this is the highest, this is the densest. We've got our physical body. A couple inches away from our body is our etheric template. It's our etheric body. And this is the densest of our energy bodies. These are all like, you know, when people see auras, or they're talking about your energy fields, it's our own energy field, and there's these different bodies or layers. This is the densest. It's physically perceived as heat. You know, usually people who heal with their hands can feel this. They can feel cold spots, hot spots. This is where we hold the residues from past life physical trauma. When we die, yes, we leave our physical body behind, but that part of our soul, our energy body that follows us around from lifetime to lifetime, detaches, okay? But we do carry our physical template. Good thing this is 2 lectures. Dr. Ian Stevenson, who's done work on, you know, on past lives, reincarnation in children. No, it actually wasn't his. It was a different documentary, but he does that as well. You know, like children who have birthmarks and scars that are where they were, well, you know, killed in other lifetimes, or where they were wounded. And what that is that's our etheric body. So quite often, like if you say you've been crushed by the rubble in an earthquake, and again, you can have a physical manifestation that doesn't fit a particular medical symptomology, you know, things that seem unrelated, like why would my shoulder hurt when my foot hurts, or it's because, you know, that was the position when you were in death. For instance, you do find people frozen in those particular things, people with curvature of the spine, because they were distorted or mangled when they, you know, at that point of death. And it's not like I like to show my imperfections or anything, but that one where I was dismembered, okay, I've got very hyper flexible joints. I mean, they're completely, in fact, my wrists have, yeah, and I can dislocate my shoulders. And my joints are quite knobbly. And I'm one of 8 kids, and believe me, nobody else has this. So it's not a genetic inheritance, but in that past life where I was pulled apart, that was left in my, I was pulled out from every joint that I had. That was left in my etheric field. So guess what? It comes back and it runs the template. You guys have probably heard this or seen this before where they, there's a leaf. And then you take a photograph of it and it's got its etheric around it. Are you aware of this one? Yeah. They cut the leaf and take the photograph again, and it stays like that. Yeah. Okay. Next is the emotional body. It radiates about 2 to 4 feet from our body. That's the feeling residues of all our lives. When the contents are highly charged, not released, it can affect the lower etheric body. And by the way, they work in 2 directions. I'm just showing that this is the personal and that's the transpersonal. But, I'm stabbed. It makes me feel grief. My mental thought is no one can be trusted. Do you know what I mean? Or I can think nobody can be trusted. That makes me feel sad. This time I have heart problems. So they can go both ways, back and forth. They radiate in and out. The mental body is, of the personal bodies, it's the highest vibration. And, it could probably fill this room. It's big, okay? If you want to know more about subtle bodies, I would recommend Barbara Brennan or David Tansley of radionics. Very good on that. And these thoughts can be conscious or unconscious, but they influence our overall life pattern and self-image. And one of the examples I'll show you tomorrow, a lady that I had as an astrology client first, when I went back, it's like 5 years later, I did some regression work on her. She was telling it all to me right then. I have to be strong. I can't count on anybody. I'm always the responsible one. And I mean, lo and behold, that was the reoccurring theme in her past lives. So the majority of medical cases are not necessarily due to genetics, as we know it. Okay, for example, I'm going to give you some thoughts. On the mental plane, I'm in danger. It makes me feel fear and anxiety. That's an emotion. I get tension in my abdominal region of the etheric. The etheric then gives me ulcers in this lifetime. Okay? It can work the opposite direction through healing. Massage can release the etheric energy in the legs. A lot of people in this that I did the regression work with were body workers who are wondering, what's happening? I start massaging somebody there and all of a sudden they're crying or laughing or, and it was like, it was actually because it was armoring. Is it Wilhelm Reich that says the armoring? Yeah, it was actually lodged into that part of the body. Okay, I'm trying not to repeat myself for time here. How much time do I have got? 2 minutes. So what that means is I'm going to ask questions and then move on to trauma, specifically as Jeffrey has brought it across with the correlation with the outer planets and how the outer planets, oh, by the way, Neptune, let's not forget, see, that's how Neptunian is that. I was just going to forget it altogether. The transpersonal plane, or the astral, is Neptune, and that's where we interface with the spiritual levels. And which, by the way, if we, so it's like the spiritual disillusionment or the spiritual attainment. And as I'll say tomorrow, I guess, like if we have any problems with like a spirit attachment or something, that's where it'll come through us there. So tomorrow what I'm going to do is, actually, I'm just real quick, because we're here, and then I'm going to work on, go on to Jeff's. I mean, I've already said this, it's just to, because I printed up the diagram, you're going to see it.
What was that part you said real quickly before you moved on? The transpersonal plane is where spirits attach themselves?
Yeah. If you, and quite often like with soul work or fragments or whatever, sometimes you have other ones that are trying to get a piece of the action as well. And it's on that plane that they start to infringe upon your own personal energy bodies and affect us. Sometimes it's not always our own stuff, but if we have a gap, you know, nature abhors a void, and if there's a gap somewhere through a disassociation, it tries to fill it, and quite often you might attract something that isn't necessarily yours, you know, back in to fill that spot. So tomorrow I'll correlate the outer planets with the various subtle bodies and talk about trauma. Actually, that would be good because Mark's talking about Uranus and trauma this afternoon, and that way it will make more sense when I talk about it using the emotional, physical, etheric, as well as, you know, the mental body and Uranus. And then some of Jeff's chakras, and then I've got enough case studies to keep you here for weeks, but I'll try to pull some of the really juicy ones. Any questions? Oh, yeah.
Would you like us to take that and make it into a handout for tomorrow?
Yeah, that's, yeah. And did you all get a handout?
No.
We're missing 35.
What? How many are there here?
There's over 60.
I'm sorry?
There's over 60.
Oh, okay, because I made 60 handouts. So
60.
I'll make more.
Because we only pass them around to half the room unless the other half had already got.
There should be 60 handouts.
No.
There's some on chairs.
I'll check to see what's left over and make a few more.
We only got to the middle part of the room.
Yeah, I know, because this. Well, I know I made 60 of them, but thank you very much.